Subscribe to The Honest Critique for current affairs, movie, book, and product reviews. Also, make sure you press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the video series are solely those of the individuals and do not necessarily represent those of The Honest Critique and its employees. The following video contains strong language which may be offensive to some viewers. Viewer discretion advised.
I'll just start with a bit of a small introduction. So today we have among us Professor Rajeev Gowda.
Professor Rajeev Gowda is a politician and more than that, known as an academician around us. He is a former member of the parliament from Karnataka.
A national spokesperson for AICC, and he currently heads the AICC Research Department. So, sir, when are we seeing you back in the parliament? I think your tenure ended on 25th July, right?
25th June, actually. So
25th June, yeah.
It's nearly 2 months already. Hopefully I'll be able to find my way back either to the Rajya Sabha or to the Lok Sabha in the next few years. Let's see. It's partly dependent on my party doing well as well, not just me.
So today we want to discuss something which is of utmost importance to a lot of millennials right now, education, which the government, in fact, is not very interested in. Though we have seen a new education policy, but just with pen and paper, but with implementation, we have seen a very poor performance in terms of education, especially with the pandemic right now. So we just want to have a small interview regarding the general education policies the government has implemented and how is the pandemic affecting education. So firstly, I want to ask you about the problem that a lot of students who have, when we asked that to send questions for Rajeev Gowda, so everybody has sent this one questions about the NEET and JEE examination that is scheduled between the 1st and 2nd week of September. And a lot of students and parents have protested against this decision with the increasing number of COVID cases, lack of public transport, lack of proper infrastructure. And it was the government's decision because the Supreme Court has given it as a government decision. But today, I think a couple of hours before as well, the stand states is NT has released a statement which reads that there is a pandemic situation, but ultimately life has to go on and the career of students cannot be put in peril for a long and full academic year, cannot be wasted. So do you think it's the best decision to go with the examination right now, given the fact that even the floods in Bihar and Assam right now?
So the real challenge is how do we deal with entrance exams to professional institutions? And, with regard to regular college degrees or schools or anything like that, where there was sufficient information in previous years, we were able to argue that maybe it need not be a final exam, but you take into account cumulative record and on that basis, help students finish give them a grade and help them complete their qualifying degree or something like that. But when it comes to entrance exams to to professional colleges and institutions, there's so much competition. How do you decide who gets in and who doesn't, right? And so I think the government has made its mind up that, okay, let's go forward. So the real challenge is, could this have been postponed? If this had been postponed, how would it affect the lives and careers of this student batch? Because we actually don't know when this COVID crisis will actually end, right? Whether there is a light at the end of the tunnel in the form of a vaccine that can be deployed, etc., we don't know. So the question is, how much are you willing to, what's the risk that you're willing to take? So here, the issue becomes, are there alternatives? And certainly the online exam-related alternatives don't seem to exist right now for these are the kinds of exams that you're talking about, the kinds of entrance exams. And the other side is, maybe if we found a way to ensure better safety in the conduct of these exams, then maybe parents and students would be willing to give it a chance. But as you pointed out, there are tremendous inequalities that are inherent in this process because a large number of students don't have access to transportation. They're going to be, they're in flood-prone areas. Those sorts of other difficulties that they're facing. So if today it's entirely possible for all these issues to be crowdsourced, and for these concerns and ideas to be shared with the authorities. And this is something that I would urge you to do. And I think I'll also try and play a role in finding out what the problems are and conveying this to the government and seeing whether we can find workable solutions that don't exclude anybody who needs to take part in the exams.
So I want to start by talking about the national education policy. The new education policy that the government introduced recently. It focuses on this very pivot of universalization of education from preschool to secondary school with 100% gross enrollment ratio in school education by 2030. With the present gross enrollment ratio at primary school over 101%, but the dropout rate is 17% when we come to secondary level. Do you think it's a feasible target? And with the other point is with the right to education, we have seen 5 states, if not, have issued notification under the RTE, and we don't even know per child costs under Section 12. With all these difficulties that has been there, do you think that's a feasible target that the government is trying to achieve, or it's again like the 5 trillion figure?
See, the 5 trillion figure will be achieved someday. It's not impossible at all. It's just a question of whether it will be achieved in this current government's lifetime or not. Well, but this is very different. This requires a lot of effort and supporting legal and other apparatus. And so, when you see the aspiration of increasing enrollment ratios and ensuring that every child is in school and learning well from early childhood to post-secondary, then you need to ask, well, what was the legal framework that was supporting all this? Well, one crucial element of the legal framework was the right to education. And what has this government done when it comes to the national education policy and the right to education? They have not extended it, to the age of 18, which was something that was there in earlier draft. And so if you don't provide the legal backing, which will force everyone to supply this kind of education, to essentially, and for students to be able to demand that enrollment and to be able to get access to the 25% of seats that are available to, to disadvantaged children and things like that. So, if you don't take that next bold step of extending RTE to the age of 18, things of that sort, then you're missing, there's a gap between the aspiration and what is achievable. And there, I think this government really missed a very crucial, the national education policy talks a good game, but doesn't necessarily deliver.
Hello, sir. This is Madhu here.
I know.
My next question is, the general quality of India's engineering graduate is exactly where it was a decade ago, says the annual employability survey of 2019. And 80% of Indian engineers are not fit for any job in the knowledge economy right now. They are mostly unskilled. Any changes whatsoever to the education system that have been made so far is clearly it's not been better for the country. Even in the Congress manifesto, there is a mention of unemployment in the country, but there is no reason stated behind it. So what do you think is the reason and solution for improving the quality of education, especially for engineering?
So you have two issues here that you addressed. One is unemployment more broadly and generally. That's partly a function of growth of the economy, the nature of jobs that are being created in the economy, etc. And the last few years we've gone through a very, very difficult time as a nation. During the UPA years, we started to see new job creation not keeping pace with the growth of the economy. And now, in the last 5-6 years under Modi Sarkar, we've actually seen job loss growth, where you actually see job losses. Part of this has to do with the growth rate of the economy, but part of this has to do with, of course, the changing nature of jobs that are being created and counted. We are seeing a movement away from towards automation of various kinds. So there is a concern, and especially in other countries, there's a concern that there will be a much more drastic reduction in the number of jobs available, given that automation is going to pick up in terms of numerous other kinds of activities. Now, in India, we thought that we would be able to address that employment challenge by diversifying further into the services economy, into what we call the tertiary economy. But this pandemic, the COVID crisis that we're going through, has really shattered a large section of that, a large proportion of those services sector jobs. So, for example, if people wanted to work in the restaurant space, they're not really open. If they wanted to work in tourism, well, who's traveling? If you think about services of various other kinds, travel and but one kind of service, which is education, is picking up, but a lot of that has moved online, right? So it's actually we're at a very, very difficult stage in terms of trying to understand where jobs can be created and where people can be employed. Now, that's part of the structural change going on in the larger economy. And that substantially affects also people who have degrees and who are college graduates or possibly engineers and things like that. So there, different gradations exist. Those who are good and those who are employable in the cream of the crop in some sense. Actually, life could be tremendously good for them going forward, because we are now moving to a new stage of evolution in terms of technology. We're moving to a stage where apps are more important, where rather than manufacturing alone. And in that context, the fact that Indians are very good at software and things of that sort, and possibly we may be able to develop products which are globally deployable, could lead to a lot more opportunity, a lot more jobs. And now that people also have gotten used to the idea that they can go online for anything, we may see an explosion in e-learning opportunities, in e-services of various kinds, which may also provide opportunities for Indians in different kinds of domains, right? I mean, there have been companies like Tutor Vista out of Bangalore, where Indians were tutoring American kids on the internet. Normally, you never thought that tutoring or counseling or those sorts of things could be done remotely, but those are all entirely possible. Now, that's one dimension. But for the vast majority of Indians, we probably need to come up with newer kinds of programs. We probably need initiatives in rural reconstruction. I don't mean the term in a loose sense. I actually mean in terms of rainwater harvesting structures, in terms of newer kinds of transportation and irrigation structures. Various kinds of greening mechanisms, things like that, where people get employed closer to home and in a manner which is actually beneficial to India in terms of climate change resilience, for example. Similarly, a lot of that needs to be done even in urban settings. We may need a whole bunch, we didn't realize until the reverse migration crisis that the whole economy is subsisting on cheap labor, who are actually in dire straits, right? So there's a much larger challenge there. Okay, so this is sort of a little bit of a glimpse of the larger issue. On the engineering side, right, you would normally hear stories about 80-85% of our students being unemployed. There are 2-3 dimensions to this. One is, who's going into engineering? Are these people going in there with an aptitude for engineering, with an interest in the subject? Or is this part of this great herd that we've learned to develop in this country, where, this is not new. When in the 1970s, I chose to do a BA in 1979, which is about 30, 40 years ago, 40 years plus ago, I was regarded as a rebel because I chose to do a BA. I've had a very good life with a BA, with a master's and a PhD, of course, after that. But the basic point is, it's a risky career choice when everyone assumes that engineering will lead to better options. And when I used to be a professor at IIM, 90% plus of my students who in the MBA program were essentially engineers who were switching to management. Okay, now, so why are they getting in is one question. And the second part is, what's the range of institutions and what's the quality of the teaching and the education that's provided there, right? Part of that is in the classroom, part of that is outside the classroom, engagement with the workforce, engagement with the world of innovation and technology, opportunities to get proper, on-the-job training in internships. All that is often missing. And in India, we have this great shortcut mentality. Every kid is, not every, but large numbers of kids are saying, okay, I need to turn in a project report for an internship. Well, who can I get a project report where I can cut and paste my name in somebody else's, in the place of somebody else's, right? I mean, there's a lot of that kind of shortcut mentality. But the other part of it also has to do with, if you really want to get people to develop that, that capability, then you need soft skills, you need hard skills, you need immersion, you need internships, you need mentoring. There's so much else that's required in that larger ecosystem. There's nothing coming in the way of us doing it. It's just that we need to structure it and make it happen and incentivize schools and colleges and students to go out there and do it. I can assure you that I have a lot of students who come and do internships with me over the years, and they do it partly because it looks good on the resumes and they get a very good exposure, and then it helps them move along in their careers. So it's a much larger nut to crack, but we are wasting people and talent by not rising to the occasion. It can be remedied.
So I have a bit of a follow-up on that. So there's a survey which was conducted by Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, and the survey found out that 62% of employers were dissatisfied with the quality of engineering graduates. And we have recently seen Tata and Infosys have also set up educational institute to bridge the gap that exists in our education system post their degrees are done. It's not even job training, it's the things that they have not learned or covered in their educational institute that they are teaching to the students. So since you've spoken about the professional part, what are the things that we need to change in our educational system to actually the students can go out job ready rather than Tata or Infosys to train them again?
See, I think the purpose of an education system would be to be a little broader than just making students job ready. That's a very important part. But we also want to create, creative, critical thinking, compassionate citizens as well, right? So not just capable people, but multiple other dimensions also. So there's a lot more that the education system needs to deliver. And but all of this comes from a variety of activities that are part of the curriculum, which are part of the extracurricular activities, which come from immersion in the world around them during summers or something like that. But why do Infosys and all that do that? They do that because the syllabus that's taught in the school, in the college, it does not necessarily match what's required in their particular workplaces, right? That's not necessarily the case with a law firm, for example. If a person comes out with a law degree, they are expected to have enough knowledge of the law so that they'll be able to get on with the job. It's just that in the technology case, in fact, you must think back to all these companies and how they did very well over the years. The syllabi had not changed dramatically, but we had organizations like NIIT and Aptech and others, which actually trained people in programming, and that's how we were able to go out there and create that workforce. And many of these things are now doable online. There are massively open online courses, numerous other possibilities through which people can pick up that knowledge. What's missing, really, which is not easy to teach, is the stuff that you need in terms of attitude, right? We need an attitude of willingness to learn, not just trying to score on a particular exam, but engaging with knowledge. We need the self-confidence to say, okay, what does it take? What's, interesting about this particular issue? And, I tell people this, many times I end up giving lectures in various colleges. And sometimes people will tell me, especially when I used to be a professor at IIM, they would say, sir, you're lucky you're at IIM, students get all these opportunities. And I would tell them, there's nothing coming in the way of you want to do case studies on something. If you just read the newspaper, there's a case study lurking in every newspaper every day, okay, about some company that's done well. I was just reading a story in the Economic Times about Amazon and Reliance competing with one another in a variety of spaces, right? There's a story that you can write there, but the problem is most people don't read the newspapers. If they're watching TV, they're watching the crap that shows up as television debates. They're not really using what's available to us. And this is the world of the internet. There's nothing that you can't access here that will allow you to do stuff on a global scale. Look at all of you, how you've been able to create this whole platform, right? Did someone come and tell you to go ahead and do it? No. A bunch of innovative youngsters came together and said, hey, there's a gap out there, and this is something that we should fill, and it's good for us. And look at the confidence with which you're all asking me questions and even engaging with me, right? I mean, all this is good training that's available. These are opportunities that are available to people all the time, everywhere. Some of this needs to be structured in the larger ecosystem, but a lot of it can come from people having the self-confidence that and the drive and the aspiration to say, we are not going to be stuck with excuses. We're going to go out there and solve problems. There's not going to be a single obstacle that we can't overcome.
Okay. So my question is related to the COVID pandemic and the education amidst it. I wanted to know, there was this report that came out recently, which says that many children are helping or, providing temporary support to their parents who have lost their jobs. And same cases have been seen in other countries too. And in India, you see there's already an estimate that Indians have lost almost 12 crore jobs. And so considering that we already have child labor prevalent in India, do you think the children will have to bear the brunt of this too, like parental unemployability and the economic crisis that is going on?
Yeah, actually, this is a huge problem, and I'm glad that you flagged it. So basically, think about 2-3 dimensions to this, right? Especially people in in daily wage work, in in various other kinds of lower income level incomes, jobs. They've all been facing a huge crisis. There's been the 12 million jobs lost is mostly. We're talking about formal sector jobs. But the informal sector, as you saw during the migrant crisis, is an extraordinary crisis out there. In rural areas, you're going to see a little more movement towards Manrega and other kinds of manual labor. In the process, someone will have to help out at home. Somebody else will have to help out wherever possible. They'll send kids to do additional kinds of work and additional kinds of jobs because every bit of money helps. In the process, these are the kids who are not anyway having access to technology and to online classes. And so they are also, their whole educational careers, such as they were already being disrupted even further. Okay? So they become the first choice for their parents for that additional desperation-driven income. Okay? And then, if you actually look at the legal framework, a few years ago, the BJP government actually came up with laws that allowed children from the age of 14 onwards to be able to work in family businesses and things like that to help out at home. So all these are actually, and then the right to education is not being extended in terms of age of 18 and things of that sort. So all these will put pressure, and the first victims will be children and their education, and then there's another aspect to this, which is gender, which is girls will also bear a disproportionate burden because they will be the first ones chosen to drop out. They will be the ones asked to take care of their siblings. They'll be the ones asked to do household labor. Who knows what else, right? And so in the process, you will see a tremendous price being paid by our youth, our children, because of the pandemic, and this is all happening in an invisible manner, and we won't see see this all happening because it's happening in rural India, it's happening in poorer parts of urban India, and we are all basically saying, as long as I'm staying safe and staying alive, that's basically the attitude right now.
Right. So like a follow-up question would be that you talked about the inaccessibility of some students in this pandemic towards learning or education. So keeping that in mind, because during this pandemic, learning has become e-learning and trying to compensate for real classroom experience. But would it be right to say that e-learning is still an elitist concept that cannot be practiced in India due to the technical know-how, lack of it, and lack of accessibility to technology?
Yeah, at this moment, it's available to only a select section of the population. And the fact of the matter is that, we've always been concerned about digital divides, right? Access to the appropriate technology in computers, smartphones. That's very limited in India. But smartphones certainly have made life easier. But even those are only about 200 million smartphones in the country, probably. I don't have the exact number on but fundamentally, there are large numbers of children who don't have access to the smartphones. And then there's the challenge of bandwidth, right? And the access to. I was trying to do this. I'm doing this call on my phone, but my wife's Mac, for some reason, was acting up, and the wireless wasn't doing so well. So if I'm facing this, just imagine what others would be facing elsewhere. And so that's the other thing. And then there's this whole challenge for both teachers and students at this point, that a lot of them are not used to this technology, and we've not, because I'm also finding that a 1 hour Zoom conversation like just that, like what we're going through, actually drains me of so much energy. It's not it's not funny. And if I'm giving a lecture on the economy, on the national education policy, any of these that I've done recently, on the environment impact assessment, draft notification, each of those, by the time I'm done with a PowerPoint presentation, I'm like, wow, where did that energy go? Anyway, because and there's this whole business of trying to connect with an audience that's not physically there. Learning happens partly in a collegial, congenial environment where we all, draw energy from our peers, and all that's not possible today. And so there's so many challenges which will create this elitist divide between those who have access and those who don't. On the other hand, I do want to point out that technology could be, in the future, a great level. It can provide the ability for all of us to, ensure that at least some minimum high-quality education is accessible to every child in India, and for that matter, in the world, right? So there's a lot of work that we have to do to get there. Unfortunately, the pandemic has sort of pushed us into this, into the deep end of the pool, as it were, and some of us have the, equipment to float. Many others are not even trying to, they're just trying to survive and swim to the side of the pool in safety. Okay.
So there's one more follow-up question, and it would be my last question. It's regarding there's another news report that has come. Actually, it's by British agency report that has come. It says that almost many of the students across the world are postponing their foreign travels and studying abroad programs. And similarly in India also, almost 61 students have almost respondents for a news report have said that they will also defer their plans to study abroad. So apart from, besides that global travel is a threat to the whole situation, do you think conducting online classes without the real classroom experience and still charging the entire tuition fee without any reduction in it would be another reason why children or students are postponing their study abroad plans?
Yeah, so I can tell you from some personal experience, my current chief of staff and a former chief of staff both got into Harvard University, into the Kennedy School of Government for master's degrees. And, I have a Wharton PhD, but I was waitlisted at Harvard. I would have loved to have gone myself, right? Anyway, so the point is, here are these two people who achieved, sort of the aspiration of a lifetime to get into one of the world's top schools. Both of them have chosen to defer their admission, okay? And they actually, it's not, I think they have to apply again next year, okay? So they may get in, they may not. But the basic reason why they chose not to go is because they are, it's a very expensive proposition for them. And then at the end of it, if they're not going to be able to get that immersion, the experience of being there, education is, after all, not just the curriculum material. It's your classmates, it's your classroom experience, it's the speakers who come and engage with you, the teachers, everything else that goes along with being there. And of course, being in a foreign country and being part of other traditions and stuff of that sort. So, but the American university economic model, the British, Australian, a lot of these are actually very, very broken in some ways because they've been subsisting on fees from foreign students, full fee paying foreign students from China, especially, to some extent from India as well. There are other dimensions. I mean, all of us, when I went and got my PhD at Wharton School at Pennsylvania, I, sort of paid in kind by being a research assistant and, doing a lot of low-cost labor in exchange for the opportunity. Okay, so this year, the global higher education market has been badly affected, and we'll see when things will change. It's also affected faculty salaries. It's affected faculty hiring. It's a real challenge. But they're trying not to. And then, of course, in the midst of all this, the Trump administration has come up with all kinds of crazy moves that courts have had to intervene to to counter. But this year, I don't think is a good year for students or their or their investment in higher education in a foreign setting. Yeah, it's a tough year.
So thank you for responding to my questions.
So irrespective of any party's manifesto about education that I've read, one thing that that I saw that is lacking is a policy for children with dyslexia or learning disabilities. So there are policies for children with special needs, and but those only concentrates on autistic or MR children. But dyslexics are normal children with disabilities in reading and writing only. So these children are studying in normal schools, but they are subjected as slow learners, and thus they are dropping out of schools, or the schools are sending them out of schools. And there are some schools for especially for dyslexic children, but they don't have a specific policy to run on. And those children are still have to write the same examinations that normal kids are writing. So what alternatives can be brought for these kind of children?
So I think, Madhu, what you need to do there is, the system needs to be more sensitive to the range of learning challenges that exist. And, I never discovered that dyslexia existed until I was much older. It wasn't even a concept when I was growing up, right? And but it may have affected many of my peers. Who knows? Anyway, so I think bringing these issues up and sensitizing the education establishment will ensure that there are allowances made for differential kinds of learning challenged kids. And I do know that there are arrangements made at the examination level where some kids do get more time, things like that. But this is at the at the board level. It's something that needs to be integrated with the overall school system. See, overall, the many dimensions of which are not taken into account so easily. One is these sort of learning challenges. Other has to do with mental health-related issues, anxiety and things like that. And so nowadays, you start to see the better, well-off schools. They tend to have counselors. They tend to have other kinds of interventions which identify and address these issues. We probably need to find ways to integrate this across educational institutions, regardless of how well off the school is. So this is a good point that you're raising. It's something that we'll keep in mind for future manifestos and policies.
Thank you, sir.
So, sir, I'll be now picking your brain a bit for the national education policy. So I have a few questions on that. So it was a vast document of 66 pages, but it goes on to iterate the few similar points. So just to cover the points which have not been covered or which have not been actually been there before. This is a new implementation that I've just been talking about. So firstly, sir, what's your take on the 5+3+3+4 curriculum structure instead of a 3+2+3 and the transfer of credits? Does it make any sense, or it's just the reiteration of the same thing with the special emphasis on just skill education?
See, there are many different ways of addressing this. So how they would, and implementation, not just at the school level, but across the various policies, implementation is going to be key. Okay. Now, I don't really have too much to say. There are people more expert than me on this early childhood education and how to emphasize that. So in many ways, it may be a very good thing that we are going out there and engaging with kids at a younger age, at a very formative stage. But where are we asking that kind of education to be made available? In Anganwadi centers. From whom? The Anganwadi employees are usually contract employees at a very low wage, and they are trained to do health-related interventions, not education-related. Okay? So there's a gap right there. So intention and reality is a big gap. Okay? Now, the skilling part, right? What do we worry about? When, it's good to be able to be skilled. It's good to be able to say that people are practically capable of one thing or the other, and it will help people's self-confidence. But we've got to watch out that both in the school system and then even in the college 4-year degree system, because there are opportunities to, essentially exit after the first year of degree with a certificate, after the second year with a diploma, after the third year with a paper degree, and only after the fourth year with a degree that counts for higher admission, things like that. Okay, so think about who will end up being forced out. People will be, the poorer kids, the poor people who may be very bright, but whose parents want them to be able to go out and get a job quickly. All of those people will possibly be pushed out through all these exit options under the name of skilling, right? So we've got to try and think through how are we going to identify who has the aptitude for higher education and who, would be better off in various kinds of, skills and various other kinds of professions. Okay, and we also need an attitude in society which respects the different kinds of skills and professions that exist out there. India still has some caste hang-ups where people who are knowledge workers are sort of prized and revered, while people who work with their hands often get less rewards and are often regarded as less worthy of respect. And so there are a lot of changes that we require out there. So there are those dimensions, but I think getting everyone to learn how to be useful, in terms of capabilities, right? I mean, one of the side effects of the lockdown is that I have been doing a lot of cooking, okay? It makes me feel good that I've been able to, this another dimension to my life. But I had never stepped into a kitchen until I went to the US. And there I was forced to learn, right? And but it's a very useful skill. And it's a skill that could also lead to all kinds of opportunities in the restaurant and, cloud kitchen. Who knows what kinds of opportunities would be available to people who enjoy doing this sort of thing. Okay. Anyway, all I'm trying to say is that yes, let's let's approach these things with a certain openness, but let's also be clear that we don't want the poorer people to be pushed out because of the availability of exits that exist right
now. So there's this controversial part of the NEP that with the policy recommendation that medium of instruction till class 5 and preferably till class 8 will be in home language, mother language, or the local language. Do you think this creates more division and problems related to migration? For example, a student studying in, for example, my state, West Bengal, in a Bengal instructed medium and goes for a neighboring state like Orissa for migration will face the same problem with the language barrier? Because as we know that English is one of those only language which binds all of us together, because probably we can have this conversation as well because of a common language which exists between us.
So this is not an easy issue at all. And, basically we've learned over the years that children learn best in their mother tongues, right? But there's some population which, as you pointed out, migrates across the country. There are families where, the mother and father speak different languages. All these are issues. And, but I want to point out 2-3 things there. How we teach language is something that's worth sort of really looking at. I, after high school, went and studied French, okay? And I was able to pick up that language very quickly because it was taught in a manner that made it fun, made it easy to understand. It was, sort of multimedia, so there's there was a whole set of approaches which make language learning come alive, right? Language should not be seen as an imposition, and it usually was that way. And see, I'll just tell you, my mother tongue is Kannada, and the other language that I'm probably even better at is English. Both of these are gender neutral when it comes to objects, right? When I speak in Hindi, or for that matter, French, you have objects have gender, right? The maize is masculine and the kursi is feminine. Maybe I got it wrong. I don't know. It doesn't come naturally to me. I'm making a mistake all the time. And people who are listening to me speaking in Hindi, and I occasionally give bhashans in Hindi, basically will say, hey, what is this? Or something like that. But the point is, I don't laugh at people. They have broken English. And but I was never... there's no, I sort of fell in love with Hindi only in college when I discovered the magic of Hindi poetry and things like that. But otherwise, along with English, Hindi has become a linked language partly because of Bollywood and, certain other things, not from government or the classroom, but from some cultural shared experiences, you might say. Okay. Now, I do feel that even in spite of having grown up in Bengaluru, that there's a lot of, Kannada that I could have mastered, which I somehow missed out on because of, because Kannada was actually my third language in school, okay? And, so we want children to be, multilingual. We want to, everyone to have an attitude that each language is an additional strength, not an imposition, right? But once again, when you think about what are going to be the divides in the country, you're going to see that in North India, they're not going to learn a South Indian language. They're going to learn Sanskrit as a third language. Sanskrit, so far, I've seen a lot of people have an attitude of, oh, it's a scoring subject. It's not something that's, obviously they master the language possibly, but it's not something that they implement in the real world. And so they're missing out on that opportunity to master that other language that would make them, help create a certain, integrated nation in some ways, where everyone understands another language. Actually, growing up in Bangalore was a fantastic experience for me because we would actually catch movies in multiple languages. We'd have classmates who spoke multiple languages, and so we were often quite familiar with multiple languages. And a part of this is coming from Bangalore's population composition, but also we are in a tri-state area. We have Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu very close by, and so there's a lot of this thing. And then of course people from Kerala have migrated here, Bengalis, Prabhashis are all over, things like that. And so in that sense, basically we've had an opportunity to watch movies in different languages and engage with language in a very positive manner. Okay, I've been to Durga Pujas in Bengali Association, for example, right? Things like that. And so that's the spirit we need, not imposition of language, but the joy of embracing new languages and new cultures, etc. That's going to require a lot of curricular change. It's going to require a lot of work to make sure that what was always a concern, that if you don't master English at a very young age, you're going to be left out of the competitive world, right? And even now, going forward, how will this be implemented? Will you see private schools offering English education and therefore drawing those students who can afford it? And then, the usual problem of inequality starting at the age of 3, okay, which already exists in this country.
So this is the question I wanted to ask a Congress MP for a very long time since the NEP came out. And this is regarding education is a concurrent subject. And the states do you think the states should have been consulted before implementing this policy? And also, does it promote more centralization regarding taking major decisions, which the Congress has a different point of view as mentioned in the manifesto? Because with reference, the first point itself in the manifesto points out Congress will propose that school education to be transferred to statelets in the 7th schedule of the Constitution, while retaining the higher education union list. So what's your take on this?
Yeah, so basically, I think the Congress believes in diversity, in decentralization, and we do believe that if a state does not pay attention, or the experience has shown that if a state does not put in enough effort to provide quality education, you will see people migrating. Okay, states that were such powerhouses of talent, Bengal and Bihar, for example, from the last 30, 40 years, have seen an exodus of families because they have not maintained the same standards in their educational system. Okay, and I had classmates who came from Jamshedpur in the late 70s. Okay, to finish their high school education in Bangalore, things like that. Those who were lucky enough to be able to afford it. So I think we want a certain minimum level of quality and access and quality, and various other kinds of things. But we also want states to be able to make, innovations of their own, and we don't want excessive centralization, right? And and right now there is a concern that the way this national education policy is written, there are a lot of subtle ways in which the center will crack the whip and force states to follow follow their orders in some ways. And that is not necessarily in the spirit of the Constitution itself, and it's not something that we would be very happy about. But this is a general problem. This government has a lot of tendency to centralize and uniformize in different ways. All this one nation, one tax, one nation, one this, one nation, one that. Tends to deny the joys of diversity that we envisaged originally.
So yeah, sir, you were just talking about transferring the school education system to the state, right? And what I noticed over the years is that most of the states have been passing all their students till ninth grade without proper screening of exams. So that is something that's happening for a very long time right now. So what I personally feel that these kind of policies has led to a state where the students are going unskilled in the future because they are not screened properly through the examinations because of these policies. So what is your view on that?
See, yeah, I think this is a larger problem of the overall school system itself, right? If you've seen in recent years, there's been all these studies which show that learning has been affected at a very young age itself, okay? And so at one level, we don't want to put unnecessary exam pressure on children. On the other hand, we're finding that a fifth grade kid can't do second grade math and things like that. So what the policy needs to do is to ensure that that there are age-appropriate learning happening throughout, and it's happening in a multidimensional way, and there are ways to test that and assess that without necessarily subjecting kids to the pressure of annual exams and other kinds of things. See, when I was growing up, we used to have weekly tests. We used to have I think midterm exams and final exams. We used to have kids being failed at various stages, So I think we're overall not so excited about that. We're not so excited. But see, again, it's the general view amongst a large number of experts in this domain is that you should not be subjecting children to numerous exams along the way. Okay. So RTE actually had taken that out, okay? And now the government actually reintroduced exams, I think, at the 8th grade and the 10th grade now. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
So, sir, this is the last question that I'll be asking you, and I'll wrap it up. So I'll try to mend two questions together. So just hear me out. So the first point that has been covered on the education policy that the BJP wanted to do, and I think a lot of people have spoken about this in Parliament in 2018, there's a proposal to abolish the UGC altogether and replace with Higher Education Council. Now, this has been in relation to right now the new education policy. There's been a setup of Higher Education Commission of India, which will set up as a single umbrella for higher education, excluding the medical and legal education. Do you think this is another attempt of going behind the UGC and setting up a separate body, which was not possible in 2018?
So basically there's a lot of dissatisfaction with how many of these institutions have functioned, right? And, because there is, and during the UPA years, we brought in, other kinds of innovations. We brought in accreditation. We brought in autonomy, deemed universities, numerous other kinds of initiatives that were aimed at allowing good institutions to flourish, to come up with curricula which matched, real world trends, which promoted innovation, all sorts of things like that. But as often in India, everything also had a racket, became a racket also. People would go and, try and get a deemed university status through underhand means. All sorts of stuff used to go wrong. So generally, there's a sense that some of these institutions are not doing the job that they should have done. And instead of what this government is trying to do through this education policy is, instead of rejigging the existing infrastructure, they're saying, let's just create a whole new set of bodies, which hopefully, at least because they'll have a new mission and they will have a division between certification and recognition and regulation and standards and all that sort of thing, that they will be able to do a decent job going forward. Now, sometimes you find very, very strange developments. Some years ago, when this government first came to office, they abolished the 4-year degree program that had been introduced in Delhi University. And as a member of the Human Resource Development Committee of Parliament, I do recall the UGC chairman testifying before us on a variety of issues. And one question I asked was, why are you abolishing the four-year degree? And he said to me, the education policy of 1968 or whatever says it should be 10 plus 2 plus 3. So I said, boss, this is not reducing it to 10 plus 2 plus 2. It's actually adding an extra year, right? And so what's your problem? And he didn't have an answer. It was just that was the policy. Let's change it because of whatever reasons the student unions affiliated with the government had. And then now we're moving back to a four-year degree, right? So a lot of this is a lack of consistency, a lack of clarity on what the government really wants and doesn't want out of this whole experience. So I'm a bit concerned about what was the UGC doing in the context of agreeing to go along with rationales that did not make sense, right? So maybe all this is part of the change that's required. The other thing that I discovered was I was also one of the MPs from Rajya Sabha on the National Council for Teachers Education. And this is another huge body which accredits teaching institutes and things like that. And there again, you have one mega racket going on in this country, right? Where all kinds of Namkawasti institutions will issue certificates and people will get a degree certificate or a B.Ed or whatever, and they will be able to get a job, which is as a teacher. And now we're going to try and dramatically change that whole game. So yes, a lot of these institutions and administrative frameworks needed a lot of change, and so maybe the best way, according to the government, is to replace existing systems with something new. Well, it will all depend on what is the mission of these institutions, how well they're designed, who are the people who occupy those positions, what kinds of work cultures and professional approaches that they bring to the table. So it's going to be a lot of work in progress, and we'll be keeping an eye on what happens.
Yep. So before we end it, I just want to get a final remarks of yours on, you have been an IIM professor, and we have seen over the years, these premium institutes, only 3 of the IIMs actually featured in the 100 best management schools. And we have seen how the crumbling infrastructure of IITs and NITs have been. There has been, I think, an NIT that has been allocated and without a library or proper labs some time back. This has been the case with a lot of institutions that have been built and been allocated but not been done. So if you could just put your final remarks on this, that the government is thinking of spending around 4.6% of total GDP, but that's a distance dream right now. At least the UP has spent more than that. With the current government spending. Regarding to that, and the last point I want to talk about is education has, the Education Institute under Mr. Modi especially has been, he has squashed dissent to an extent that you protest right now and you end up in jail. And I've seen you on the streets of Bangalore after the CA, and even the protest, you have said that you're representing the people on Parliament and you're representing on the streets right now. If you could just sum it up for us, like how has education, which was a space for debate, discussion, dissent, has just limited to an anti-national and national perspective?
Yeah, so first part of your question dealt with resources. And unfortunately, the kind of resources that the government needs to invest in public education infrastructure has not matched aspiration, hasn't even matched what is announced in the budgets. And actual spending is much lower than what is usually announced every year. And that has its impact on infrastructure and everything else. See, in the Western universities, where I got my PhD in an Ivy League institution, the University of Pennsylvania, working. And there, a lot of alumni also contribute. And, so I think in India, we need a little bit more of a culture of those who have benefited from institutions giving back. And that would address a little bit of the gap which government funding or the lack of it creates. God knows we need a lot more institutions out there. Now, on the other issue that you raised, right? One of the worst developments in modern India is this whole notion of dissent being equated to being anti-national. If you cannot question, if a student, an idealistic student, cannot stand up and say, I don't think this is right, I question what you're doing, and instead you have, a situation where thugs roam the corridors of Jawaharlal Nehru University, attacking students. You have a situation where students who took part in organizing protests against policies that they did not like are arrested on on dubious grounds and false accusations of fomenting riots. You're creating this is the worst kind of closing of human mind that you're introducing into the country. And I can tell you that this is not the way things were during the UPA years. You would have seen students go out and take part in protest rallies everywhere. And we need, I'm in politics partly because I grew up in a family of freedom fighters and politicians. My uncle, the late M. Krishnappa, was a student leader during the Quit India movement. I grew up listening to his stories of being arrested as a student leader fighting against British rule. Okay, and I think some of you are from Christ University. If you cross the street and go to Bangalore Dairy, you will see a statue of his there because he's the founder of the dairy movement in Karnataka. Anyway, but so if I'm in politics, it's because it all comes from the courage that people have to question the establishment, and the kind of muscling of voices, of dissent, of criticism, of debate that's going on today is the worst development that you could have in modern India, and this is something that we should all fight against. It's encouraging to me that you even asked this question and brought it up with this discussion, because it's so easy to just go with the flow and say, why raise hackles? Why draw attention to ourselves from people who might be ready to wrap us on the knuckles? That's the sort of thing. And overall, as a nation, we will see less dissent, but that's where I think institutions should not fail us, whether in the media, whether the courts, whether the politicians and political parties. Right now, these are tough times, but I'm sure we will overcome.
Thank you so much, sir. I know you're a bit running late in that sense, but I think we're leaving you like 10 minutes in hand right now to join the next session. But thank you so much, sir, for taking your time. You know how the mainstream media works. It won't cover issues, so we decided to speak on education, cover certain aspect. I know it's a very broad aspect, and we try to cover as many issues as possible. So in case we left out something, we will try to cover next time when we have you. But thank you. But honestly, sir, your parliament record has been brilliant with the number of debates participated, or with attendance, or with the number of questions of private members raised. And it's been far better than the national average. So we would love to see you back in parliament soon, probably raising such topics that we discussed about, because we know how the Lok Sabha works right now.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I don't want to comment about that, but I want to say that I will work to try and go back because there's so much more to do in terms of building our country. But I must commend you and your colleagues for creating this platform, for allowing us to go in such depth on such a range of questions. And if I didn't have this other, actually it's a quiz that I signed up for. So it's not exactly, ID tabs are fun as well. I went to this quiz. And compare the quality of discussion we've had today with what you find on TV, right? And so that's really, that will tell you what a difference this platform has the potential to make. So I look forward to engaging with you guys some more, and all the very best. Thank you for having me, and stay safe.
Yeah, and do tell the other congressmen to join us as well at times.
Across party lines, no problem. Happy to recommend you all. Okay.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir.